Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Progress Illusion, Reclaiming Our Future from the Fairytale of Economics by Jon D. Erickson. Narrated by David Colacci. Forward. So what kind of economist are you? John Erickson's answer to that common question is that he is an ecological economist. He explains what led him from standard training in neoclassical economics at an elite university to this rebel faction that seeks to reconstruct economics from a new foundational paradigm. Ecological economics is based on a new pre-analytic vision of the economy as a dependent subsystem of an ecosystem that is finite, non-growing, and subject to the biophysical laws of thermodynamics and ecology. Such a revisioning is quite unfriendly to the ideology of growthism that rules the politics and economics of our time. It is not the glide path to professional advancement, much less to the profitable Wall Street career in finance that many of his Ivy League contemporaries chose. That makes this book sound rather theoretical and abstract, but the story is told as a personal narrative by someone born in 1969 and experiencing the social, economic, and political history of his generation, all the way from his student days to his current position as a distinguished professor and leader in ecological economics. The narrative includes instructive retellings of the political and economic struggles of his generation, which overlaps the generations of us listeners so we can personally identify with his story. It helps that John is a good storyteller, a talent that carries over from his work as a documentary filmmaker. He describes and explains his increasing dissatisfaction with the unwillingness and inability of today's leading economists to seriously confront the related catastrophes of ecological destruction and economic breakdown that we are experiencing. What were the specific conflicts and anomalies that brought him to ecological economics? I will leave that for him to tell. But one big one I will mention is the belief that ecological economics should be the cornerstone for economics as a whole, rather than a minor subcategory. In the Journal of Economic Literature classification of over 700 subject areas, ecological economics is indexed way down the list as Q57. The idea that the 720th brick should be removed and refashioned to replace the cornerstone of the whole edifice is not an easy idea to sell, especially to the original builders who still live in that structure and control entry into it. As should be expected, the same independent mind that was not satisfied with neoclassical economics will not uncritically accept everything written in the name of ecological economics. In particular, Erickson rightly urges stronger emphasis on distributive justice, as well as on sustainable scale, and cautions against empty empiricism, such as pricing nature by econometric estimates of individual willingness to pay for environmental benefits or to accept payment for environmental loss. On the latter, he quotes Keynes's caution that such economistic numerology is like those puzzles for children where you write down your age, multiply, add this and that, subtract something else, and eventually end up with the number of the beast in Revelation. In addition to Keynes, Erickson's critique of the mainstream neoclassical growthists draws on the forgotten classical economists, as well as more recent economists unjustly ignored, such as Henry George, Karl Polanyi, and Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen. Careful attention is given to the history of economic thought, with appreciation for good ideas, regardless of their ideological origins. I strongly recommend this insightful book to all citizens because the errors of economists are disastrous, and we are currently suffering from them. In addition, I especially recommend it to university students who are struggling, as John Erickson did, to choose a worthy and sustainable path for their studies and future work. They will be instructed and inspired by this example. Herman Daly, Emeritus Professor, School of Public Policy, University of Maryland. Preface. Promises of an Ecological Economics. I'm not that kind of economist. This is a defense I've retreated to on many occasions, often when trying to explain that my profession has no magic answers to intractable questions. What's the value of the climate to the economy? What's the trade-off between jobs and the environment? What's the worth of a songbird? Economics is often used to sidestep moral judgments about what we value. It's not us who's choosing winners and losers. It's simply the market. But putting a price on everything presumes people and planet are disposable, tradable, and otherwise here to serve the invention we call the economy. In other settings, my qualification has been a rejoinder to the old joke about economists, lawyers, and politicians alike. What do you call 1,000 economists at the bottom of the ocean? A good start. When attacked by those who vilify economics as arrogant, ahistorical, and narrow, I wholeheartedly agree. But then I argue for a more modest, reflective, interdisciplinary economics. An economics that can contribute to, not replace, democratic decision-making. An economics that learns from, not ignores, its own history. An economics that partners with, not dominates, other disciplines. In essence, this book is an answer to the question, so what kind of economist are you? My long-winded response begins with unpacking the term itself. Economics is derived from the Greek word oikonomia, the management of the household. In ancient Greece, oikos referred to the family, the basic unit of Greek society. But oikonomists today study households of all shapes and sizes. Microeconomists study the resources that make things, the people who consume things, and the things themselves. Macroeconomists study the whole, the sum of the parts that make up local, regional, and national economies, as well as the systems of money, law, governance, and trade that stitch the parts together. Beyond these two broad distinctions, economics splinters into many specialties. There are labor, business, agricultural, consumer, behavioral, and even neuroeconomists. There are microeconomists who study the sports economy, tourist economy, forest economy, transportation economy, and on and on. There are macroeconomists who specialize in specific countries, time periods, or even other economists. If there is an activity, resource, place, or person connected to the economy, there is probably an economist who has claimed it as the household of their specialization. In all, the Journal of Economic Literature, JEL, classification is broken into 20 categories with over 700 subject areas. From A10 to Z39, the domain of today's oikonomia is the entirety of humanity. My own affinity has been with Q57, ecological economics. Early in my education, I discovered ecological economics as a scientific understanding of the economy that is guided by sustainability, inclusiveness, and fairness. Tellingly, economics and ecology share the Greek word oikos, together the management and study of the household. Ecology's household has historically been focused on nature separate from humans, and economics has focused on humans separate from nature. Ecological economics was intended to embed the human system within the ecosystem, blurring the lines between the natural and social sciences. The formalization of this transdiscipline in the late 1980s challenged a growing economic imperialism that defined humans as consumers, society's purpose as growth, and our relationship with the earth as overlord. Among the JEL codes, Q57 is a more recent addition, lumped in with agricultural, natural resource, and environmental economics. In some respects, an official code represents a maturing of the field, a legitimization of ecological economics as a worthy subject area. However, the JEL designation also implies a specialization within economics, not a reframing of economics. Q57 has come to represent the mainstreaming of ecological economics, most prominently the idea that nature's services should be assigned an economic value and lumped in with all other economic consumption. When I joined the ecological economics tribe nearly 3 decades ago, I thought I was signing on to a revolution to upend the economization of everything. More recently, I fear we have succumbed to a worldview we were meant to challenge and replace. In articulating the kind of economics and economists I think the world needs, I have revisited some of the original aspirations of ecological economics. Books such as For the Common Good, 1989, by Herman Daly and John Cobb, inspired a generation to question the dominant economic worldview and work toward a vision expressed in their own subtitle, Redirecting the Economy Toward Community, the Environment, and a Sustainable Future. They provided another link in a long chain of thought that asks for humility in the face of uncertainty, reverence for the majesty of life, and courage to fight for justice. But today we are long past the need for merely redirecting. Interdependent economic and environmental systems are unraveling worldwide. Neo-colonial empires built on the exploitation of people and planet have run their course. Climate instability, mass extinction, and unprecedented inequality are the results. In response, the mainstream of economics has doubled down on an illusion of progress with the fate of humanity and life on Earth in the balance. But preparations to reclaim our future are underway. A new story is emerging that unpacks the human-centered narrative of modernity, reveals the ecocidal pact of the status quo, and advocates for a less trodden path of compassion and care. A new economics is being forged from a critical look at history, renewed alliances with the natural sciences, and a new social contract for education. A new economy is evolving from the diversity of voices and life experiences beyond the failures of a winner-takes-all society and the ashes of mainstream ideology. We have the will. I hope sharing my own journey can help illuminate the way. Thanks for sharing the ride. Chapter 1. The Education of an Economist. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Gordon Gekko, Wall Street. I graduated from high school in 1987, the year of the gecko. My classmates and I set aside our boyhood dreams of becoming the adventurous Michael Douglas who won the heart of Kathleen Turner in Romancing the Stone, and turned our teenage idolatry toward his portrayal of Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, a role that defined the go-go 80s. The "greed is good" speech impaled our teenage brains, and every young man in my graduating class was encouraged to do the same thing. Study economics, major in business, and make lots of money. Reporting from the New York Stock Exchange in a 1987 special for NBC News on Money, Greed, Power, Tom Brokaw reflected on the turning point in America when greed became an asset and morality a liability. When Michael Lewis published Liar's Poker 2 years later, a best-selling expose of the excesses and culture of Wall Street, a generation of 20-somethings had already drunk the Kool-Aid. More money was the goal, and the gateway to enlightenment was Econ 101. Business programs and degrees exploded in the 80s, with freshman economics at the base of the boom. Nearly 60% of the high school class of 1982 who went on to college registered for principles of micro and macroeconomics, surpassed only by enrollment in freshman composition and general psychology, the only courses over the 50% mark. My guess is the class of '87 was north of 70%. Economics had become essential to degrees in business and engineering, but also core to a liberal arts and science education. By the end of the decade, millions of young minds were armed and ready to conquer the world. My own decision about what to study in college went something like this. "Pop, what should I study in college?" "Son, if you want to make money, study business and economics." "Thanks, Pop." It was all so appealing to our hormone-induced ignorance is bliss modus operandi, especially among young men. Econ 101 presented a world order with a singular objective: consume. The individual was king, and money was the object of our desire. The rules were laid out in straightforward equations. At the intersection of the laws of supply and demand, X always marked the spot. Economics also fit an American patriotism under which we were raised, our pledge of allegiance to free markets to win the Cold War. Throughout our childhood, we imagined long bread lines behind a mysterious Berlin Wall, doctors and janitors working for the same menial wages, a Soviet Union draped in gray and black. In America, you could buy anything, anywhere, at any time. Our duty to the country was to be good consumers. Gone were motivations beyond the self. Community was a marketplace, and votes were in dollars. My high school Army recruiter's pitch comes to mind, as I was implored to join the Army not to serve my country, but to earn some money to buy a black Trans Am. Principles of economics were seen as foundational to ordered, logical, rational thinking. For the business student, micro and macro was the prerequisite to marketing, accounting, and finance. How do we get more people to consume? Marketing. How do we tally our efforts? Accounting. How do we pay for it all? Finance. And for the English or biology or political science or any other liberal arts and science major, economics became the social science elective to make sense of our side in the Cold War. Econ 101 tells a story of the unlimited wants of individuals in a world of limited means owned by the same. On the supply side, people are atomized as production units, L for labor, and all other means of production are reduced to capital, K, a never-spoken tribute to Das Kapital by Marx. L and K combine in a mathematical equation to produce Q, output. Simple. On the demand side, what is produced is unimportant, as long as it meets demand and provides an amorphous pleasure called utility. Because we can't measure utility directly, it's equated with consumption of all that Q, weighted by market prices, P. The joy of consumption does not distinguish between needs and wants. We need only concern ourselves with anonymous Qs, produced by Ls and Ks, valued by Ps, by the owners of the Ls and Ks. This circular economics worldview was built on a persona that has come to be known as Homo economicus, a caricature of human behavior that describes a self-maximizing, isolated individual at a point in time, what Thorstein Veblen described in 1898 as a homogeneous globule of desire. In a free society, the globules own their own L. In a capitalist society, some also own their own K. The consumption choices of one globule aren't to be compared with those of another, and because the wants of each glob are assumed insatiable, the world will always need more Q, at least for those with the willingness and ability to pay the P. To make more Q, we'd better have more L and K, or better yet, squeeze every last drop of Q from our resources through technology. If K can do it better than L, so be it. After all, K doesn't demand raises, sleep at night, get a virus, or whine about health care. K can also be hired and fired without a hint of guilty conscience. To keep the system growing only requires new investment in K. L sold separately. Where does investment come from? Savings. Who saves the most? Rich people. The conclusion? We'd better make sure the wealthy globules keep those hard-won dollars, especially the ones who own the K. In the education of the economist, each step of abstraction into a world of P's, Q's, L's, and K's removes us further and further from the context of societies of people cooperating under mutual interest, entirely dependent on each other and our environment. In an economic worldview, the social and eco-spheres are de-emphasized with the goal, to quote Grover Norquist, one of the architects of today's conservative movement, to shrink government down to a size where we can drown it in a bathtub. Who knows better what to do with your labor and capital, you or the government? So the logical conclusion is to shrink government and cut taxes, especially on the wealthy capital owners, aka the job creators. As the story goes, it's the rich who will take care of everyone, not out of any benevolence for the commoners, but simply as a side effect of pursuing their own self-interest. As Adam Smith put it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. In the go-go 80s, the baker became the banker, and we were told that cutting taxes on capital gains would bring a rising tide to lift all boats, fortified yachts and leaky life rafts alike. It was Smith's 1776 Wealth of Nations on steroids, without the ethical constraint of his forgotten 1759 Theory of Moral Sentiments. Gone was the inspiration of my parents' youth, when President Kennedy was inaugurated on a call to "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." As we went off to college in the year of the gecko, the Reagan Revolution told us, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. What about ethics, law, science? Surely my generation learned more than economics, marketing, and finance. Surely other disciplines challenged economic hegemony. Surely institutions of higher learning were chartered to do more than produce new consumers. All true, but a truly world view accounts for all challengers. With ethics, an economic worldview provides an internal framework where it's ethical to be greedy. After all, one person's greed to consume is another's paycheck to produce. Prosperity for all, by posterity of none. Under an ethic of avarice, any restriction on the right to more stuff was an assault on our basic liberties. Citizen was consumer. Obligation was to self. Laws in defense of our constitutional right to private property were tolerated. Others were branded regulations, to be drowned in Norquist's bathtub. If consumers want clean air and clear water, fine. Let them demand it in the marketplace. Producers will follow the dollar. Entrepreneurs will save the world. There could be no losers in a truly free market because everyone was permitted to vote with their wallet. No breadlines because the natural state of free markets was equilibrium. The part of the demand curve where people couldn't afford to buy was never discussed. The quite explicit assumption was that free markets lead to lopsided outcomes only because of lopsided effort. Gecko's greed for life, for money, for love was what our founding fathers must have meant by life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Democratic freedom was code for free markets, and the price of entry was hard work and entrepreneurship by red-blooded, self-made Americans. With an internal ethic and legal scaffolding that feigned first principles of constitutional democracy, economics departments and business programs could elbow out any dissent from other humanistic pursuits of knowledge. But the success of economics also lay in its claim to be the most scientific of the social sciences, to quote the majority view of a survey of economics graduate students. An economic worldview could beat back competition from ethics, law, and political science through a game of "my theory is more popular than yours." However, to take on the sciences would require camouflage, not competition. And so economics draped itself in mathematics, claiming an adherence to the scientific method through elegant proofs. The education of the economist is a journey into the depths of abstraction. It starts in such innocence, with linear graphs of demand and supply curves settling into predictable market equilibrium. After Econ 101, add a little calculus to get your smart on. Same story, but now we can solve for X in what seems more and more like hard science. The ultimate prize for the professional economist is the Ph.D., where only the most mathematically dogmatic ascend to the heights of abstraction. Qualifying examinations in graduate school are like Catholic catechism: memorize, regurgitate, repeat. Only the faithful shall pass and ultimately defend dissertations judged by the high priests of the econ tribe. Intelligence is measured by publishing proofs with the full force of the Greek alphabet, backed by the faith in market equilibrium sketched by hand on the very first quiz in Econ 101. The education of an economist is soup to nuts, and the Ph.D. degree is the key to power and glory. Since 1946, it has been credentialed economists who sit at the right hand of the U.S. President on the Council of Economic Advisers. Since 1969, credentialed economists have been given Nobel Prizes. Well, sort of. A memorial prize added outside the 1895 will of Alfred Nobel, bought and paid for by the Central Bank of Sweden. And since the Reagan Revolution, economics as a worldview has dominated our politics, our communities, and our sense of self. Stanford economist Edward Lazier, chairman of George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisers at the onset of the Great Recession, concluded in his article, Economic Imperialism, that economics is not only a social science, it is a genuine science. Professor Lazier finds his brethren's use of the construct of rational individuals who engage in maximizing behavior, models that adhere strictly to the importance of equilibrium and a focus on efficiency, to be the ingredients that have allowed economics to invade intellectual territory that was previously deemed to be outside the discipline's realm. Translation: greed is good, markets are the path to societal perfection, and economists have an objective truth rule of efficiency by which all decisions can be judged. This superiority of economists, as described with tongue-in-cheek by Berkeley sociologist Marion Fourcade, who has studied our academic species, is reinforced by established hierarchy within the field and a high market demand for services, particularly from powerful and wealthy parties. Fourcade points to evidence that 40% of the income of economists publishing in finance and industrial organizations comes from consulting activities with business and government. To defend this privileged position in society, the caretakers of the field come largely from the top-ranked economics departments, based on citations of each other's work, where they vote themselves onto boards of academic journals and associations and hire each other's graduate students. This study of economists explains much of what I experienced in my graduate economics classes at Cornell University, an Ivy League department with the Big Five, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Chicago, and Stanford in its crosshairs. This position of superiority was clear from the swag.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?